gentlemen, welcome back. It's nice to see you all. Everyone else may be seated. At this time, defense, do you wish to present an opening statement?
Yes, we do, Your Honor.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I stand before you today in a space filled with overwhelming sadness, painstaking grief, anger, and trauma. We have all seen and heard things that no one should have to see or hear. Things that will haunt us forever. And every one of you sitting here and in this courtroom knows that there is one person responsible for all of that pain and all of that suffering. And that person is Nicholas Cruz. And on October 21st, 2021, Nicholas Cruz pled guilty to all of the charges. And when he did that, he guaranteed that he would be punished. The question that now remains with each and every one of you is how he will be punished. Each of you will make an individualized moral decision about whether or not Nicholas Cruz should live or die. This is an individual decision. It is not a collective decision. Each of you has to make that decision only after you have heard all of the evidence, only after you have taken into consideration everything. Knowing that the law never requires you to vote for death. Not in this case, not in any case, and not in the worst case imaginable. And it's arguable that this is the worst case imaginable. During jury selection, every member of the defense team got up here and told you the things that we thought that you might see or hear. Why did we do that? First of all, we wanted to be honest with you. And second, we needed to make sure that after you heard all of that stuff, all that aggravation that the state of Florida presented to you, reasons for death, that you would want to know more, that you would need to know more. More about who Nicholas Cruz is. What shaped him? Who shaped him? Who wasn't around to shape him? And each of you said that you wanted to know every single detail. You said that it would be absolutely necessary for you to have all of the information before you made a decision about whether or not another human being should live or die. It's the oath that you took. It is the promise that you made. And everyone in this courtroom knows how difficult your job is. But we also know that you will honor your promise. And you will keep your oath. People are not crimes. People commit crimes. But we must understand the person behind the crime. What is the root cause? Some people say that the crime itself is enough to impose sentence. You are not those people. Those people that said the sentence can be imposed based solely on the crime were excused. Each and every one of you is here because each one of you said that life without the possibility of parole could be an appropriate penalty for somebody who viciously murdered 17 people. Each of you said that life without the possibility of parole could be a severe enough punishment for those crimes. If each of you only had to make a decision about whether or not Nicholas Cruz lives or dies based on the crime, your job would be very easy. But you see, that's not how the law works. The state of Florida described to you what Nicholas did. The defense will tell you who he is. That's our job. And for the last 4.5 years, we have painstakingly dug into every part of Nicholas's life. Where he came from, who was around him, who raised him, who carried him in utero, who influenced his life, who shaped him, and what contributed to that horrible decision that he made on February 14th, 2018. In telling you Nick's story, in telling you the chapters of his life, we will give you reasons for life. And that is called mitigation. Mitigation is any reason that you believe that the death penalty is not an appropriate penalty in this case. And each of you, individually, gets to decide what is mitigation to you. It is not limited to the facts of the case. It is not limited to Nicholas's background, his character, his life. It can be anything that you see or you hear in this courtroom. And it can be anything that you feel in your heart is mitigation. Please understand that mitigation is not a defense. It is not an explanation. It is not a justification, because there is no defense to these crimes. And I cannot impose that upon you enough. We would never get up here and do that. When I met Nicholas Cruz on February 15th, 2018, I knew that he was a damaged person.
Objection.
Sustained.
But I also know that wounded and damaged people wound and damage other people because they're in pain. But we don't excuse the horrific acts of damaged and wounded people. We punish them. But we take into consideration their damage when we impose sentence. We will tell you everything. You will probably wonder why we're telling you some of the things we're telling you. But we want you to be honest. We want to be honest. We're going to show you the good, the bad, the sad, the horrible, the gut-wrenching. You're going to hear that Nicholas has said a lot of really bad things. The evidence will show you that he draws a lot of bad things. And that he continues to do that stuff over at the Broward County Main Jail. You will hear about conversations that he has with other people. Sounds like a kid. You will hear that he talks and has video visitations with a woman by the name of Scarlett Lewis, whose 6-year-old son Jesse Lewis was murdered in Sandy Hook. And you will hear through those conversations that together her and Nick are trying to find a way to prevent this from ever happening again. You'll hear that one day he wants to live and one day he wants to die. And you will also hear that throughout his life he has had obsessions. Tigers, video games, guns, exercise, bowel movements, vegan diets, and most recently, demons and Satan. And you will hear that with an atomic fireball candy, he'll write on his cell wall, 666. Those are the things he does in isolation. You'll hear that he writes disturbing things like a school shooter manifesto. Horrible things. We're not hiding that from you. But his brain is broken. He's a damaged human being. And that's why these things happen. Nicholas Cruz's decision to take an Uber to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School and kill as many people as he could possibly kill is not where Nicholas Cruz's story starts. We are all profoundly affected by the places.
Objection to personal stories.
Individuals are profoundly impacted by the places that they came from. An Irish poet, John O'Donoghue, once said, "The beginning often holds the clue to everything that follows." And that couldn't be more true in the case of Nicholas Cruz. You've all already heard a lot about choices. You heard that Nicholas made a choice to get into the Uber. Nicholas made a choice to go into the 1200 building. Made the choice to load his AR-15 and pull the trigger over and over and over again. And no one here disputed any of them. But you see, Nicholas's choices don't start there. They start with the choices of a 41-year-old woman, homeless, mentally ill, drug-addicted alcoholic by the name of Brenda Woodard. The evidence will show you that Brenda was also a wounded and damaged human being. Excuse me. And you will hear that she had suffered a lifelong trauma and pain and suffering. And like a lot of people, she self-medicated with drugs and alcohol. And at the peak of her addiction, in 1998, supporting her drug and alcohol addiction by prostituting and boosting, which means she would go into grocery stores and she would steal steaks. She would take the steaks to her drug dealer, and her drug dealer would give her crack. It was during that time that she found herself pregnant on the streets of US 1. Although we know that Nicholas's conception was not planned. In fact, we're not sure if it was a trick baby or she was raped. But what we do know is that she didn't want that baby, and that she couldn't take care of that baby because she could barely take care of herself. Or her 11-year-old daughter, Daniel Woodard, who was mostly being raised by Brenda's own mother or by the foster care system. We know that Brenda chose to keep that baby, and that she chose to give that baby up for adoption. And we know that she got paid to do it. And after confirming that she was 12 weeks pregnant at a local health department here in Broward County, she contacted a private attorney who advertised private adoption in the Weekly Flyer and in the Broward County Jail, right next to the phones where the inmates could make calls. She was 12 weeks pregnant. Just finished her first trimester. And she had had no prenatal care. And at the time that Brenda Woodard signed her notice of intent to give her baby up, she was living on the street. Sometimes she found a couch. She was drinking. She was drugging. She was smoking cigarettes. And she was selling her body. As desperate as Brenda was to give her baby away, there was someone just as desperate to adopt him. And that someone is Linda Cruz. As Brenda was doing drugs, prostituting herself, roaming the streets of US 1, about 25 miles away in Parkland, Florida, was Linda Cruz, a 48-year-old woman who had recently moved from New York with Roger Cruz. And what she had wanted more than anything in the world was a baby. She had already suffered multiple miscarriages and even a failed adoption. And Linda Cruz, for all appearances, had the ability to give Nicholas everything that Brenda couldn't. And despite not legally being married to Roger Cruz, she changed her name from Seda to Cruz. She wore a ring, and she told everybody that they were married. When they adopted Nicholas Cruz, Roger was 62 years old. Linda was no stranger to creating her own reality. Although Linda and Roger did eventually get married after they adopted their second son, Zachary. 2002 they got married. They had met in 1977 when Linda was Linda Seda and Roger Cruz was married to another woman to whom he would remain married until 1991, which made Linda his mistress. And from Roger's first marriage, there were 4 children. There are 4 children. Adults, they're grown now. And they would become Nicholas and Zachary's brothers and sisters. And you will hear that after Linda Cruz died, Roger was already gone. They were parentless. Both Zachary and Nicholas would pick up the phone and call their brothers and sisters in New York. They were 17 and Nicholas had just turned 19. And they asked for a place to live. They asked for help. And they got nothing. They were parentless and they got nothing. But you see, Linda was used to keeping secrets. She had waited a long time for her perfect family, for her perfect husband, for her perfect child. She had suffered many miscarriages and she had even suffered a failed adoption. And just when she had almost given up on that dream of becoming a mother, she got a phone call from the adoption attorney. We have another baby for you. Do you want him? Absolutely, Linda Cruz said. What's important for you to know is that this is the same adoption agency same private adoption firm that Linda and Roger had used before with the failed adoption. And what's important for you to know is that when Linda filled out the paperwork, the intake paperwork to adopt a child, she was very specific about the type of child that she wanted. And she was very specific about the type of child that she didn't want. She didn't want a black baby. She didn't want a biracial baby. And she didn't want a special needs baby. But that failed adoption made Linda very desperate for a baby. And when that private attorney called her, she jumped at the opportunity to adopt that child. The child's due date, ironically, was September 25th, 1998, Linda Cruz's birthday. Unlike the state of Florida adoptions through the Department of Children and Family, this was a private adoption, which meant there were not as many rules and regulations. Didn't have the same oversight as state of Florida adoptions do. After that phone call where Linda said, "We'll take that baby," Linda and Roger Cruz had just finished building a 4,000 square foot house in Parkland, Florida. And in that house was a room just waiting for a baby. And so as Linda and Roger painted the room, bought the baby clothes, and put money into that adoption trust account, Brenda roamed the streets of US 1, doing what she had to do, doing what was the most important thing in her life, drinking and drugging and whatever she had to do to get those two things. You see, the wake of addiction is very large. How do we know the things that Brenda was doing when she was on the street? Well, because she told us a year and a half before she died. And you'll also hear from Carolyn Deacon, who was her drug buddy. And you will hear evidence that her own daughter saw her mother drinking and drugging. Brenda's alcohol and drug use was well documented throughout the adoption records, the adoption report, and the birth records. Those records will show you that Brenda was not only drinking alcohol, but she was abusing it. Now, to be honest, Brenda's self-reporting about the length of time that she drank and the amount that she drank is inconsistent. But you don't have to worry about that, because witnesses will come in. And how do they know? Because they either saw her drinking and drugging, or because they were doing it with her. You will hear that Brenda had 4 prenatal visits. 4. In 41 weeks of pregnancy. And an amnio because of her advanced maternal age. And the drug and the alcohol use would continue until about 6 weeks before she delivered Nicholas, when she was transferred to a residential drug treatment facility in Coral Springs, Florida, referred to as a prenatal addiction center. You will hear throughout her pregnancy that she had negative drug screens, but you'll hear more about that later. And you will also hear the testimony from Carolyn Deacon, who is Carolyn Deacon. Carolyn Deacon was Brenda Woodard's drug buddy. And she was also her co-defendant for their June 6, 1998 arrest for possession of cocaine. Brenda was 6 months pregnant with Nicholas when that arrest happened. And Miss Deacon will tell you the drugs that they would do, the alcohol that they would drink, and she will tell you what the streets of US 1 and A1A were like in the late 90s. And she will tell you that despite both of them being mothers, the most important thing was them getting high and getting drunk and doing whatever they had to do to be able to do that. But you see, everything changed for Carolyn Deacon on June 6, 1998. She changed her life. She got clean. And she went to Florida State Prison. And when she got released from Florida State Prison, she never spoke with Brenda Woodard again. And she never stepped foot in Broward County again. Until yesterday. Too many demons. Too many ghosts. It's too hard to be here. But she's here today. And you will hear from her. After the arrest, the adopted parents bonded Brenda out of jail. And she went to a prenatal visit. It was her first prenatal visit in almost 4 months. And the records will show you that she actually lost weight. And that the measurements of the baby had not increased. And you will hear, the evidence will show you, that her daughter, Danielle Woodard, who had actually moved into the apartment where Brenda was living, the apartment that was being paid for by Roger and Linda Cruz, she will tell you that she saw her mom drinking Colt 45, Cisco bum wine. One bottle is the equivalent of 5 shots of vodka. Smoking crack, smoking cigarettes, and renting the apartment out by the hour so that other crack addicts would have somewhere to smoke. And she will also tell you, and the evidence will show you, that Brenda had her pee in a prescription pill bottle. And that Brenda would take a piece of tin foil and put it over on top of the prescription pill bottle to keep the urine warm. And then the two of them would go and get Brenda's drug tests. As a result of Brenda's June 6, 1998 arrest, she was placed on drug offender probation. Brenda was not a stranger to the criminal justice system. She was not a stranger to drug rehab. But now she was doing both. And as part of her drug offender probation, she was required to do inpatient day treatment. She could go home at night. And when she got there at BARC, which is a local addiction facility, treatment facility here in Broward, the supervisor says to her, the records, the adoption records, will be, you'll see that, it's all over there, we'll introduce it into evidence. 1 dirty urine, Brenda, 1 dirty urine, and you're done. You're going to the prenatal addiction facility. Shortly thereafter, Brenda ended up in the prenatal addiction program, where she remained. So a residential treatment facility. She was not going home until she delivered Nicholas Cruz. Did Linda and Roger know about Brenda's criminal history? Well, we know that Brenda wasn't asked those questions in her adoption intake form, and she didn't volunteer it. But we do know that that information was important to Roger Cruz. And he asked those adoption attorneys to do a complete background check. And we and the state have all of the adoption records. They're here. You can look at them if you want when they're moved into evidence. And there was no background check. But what if there had been a background check, because we did one? What would they have found out? Roger and Linda would have found out that since 1975, Miss Woodard had been arrested continually for mostly drug offenses, drug-related offenses, and that she had been in prison. Did Roger and Linda know that Brenda was drinking and doing drugs? We don't know for sure. But they bonded her out of jail when she was arrested for possession of cocaine. And the evidence will show you that Linda Cruz actually went to the prenatal addiction program and saw Brenda there. It's hard to know exactly what they knew or what they didn't know. But I think it's reasonable to assume that Linda didn't want to know everything. So as Linda prepared for that baby to come home to Parkland, Florida, Brenda finished up her pregnancy at the Prenatal Addiction Center in Coral Springs, Florida. What do we know about Brenda's pregnancy? We know that it was very stressful and chaotic. The majority of her pregnancy, she was homeless and living on the streets. We know that she was using drugs. We know that she was smoking cigarettes. We know that she was drinking booze. Proper nutrition and proper prenatal care were not a priority for Brenda Woodard. She was an addict. You see, the wake of addiction is very large. Nicholas Cruz's prenatal vitamins consisted of Colt 45, Cisco Bombline, crack cocaine, and cigarettes. And because Nicholas was bombarded with all of those things, he was poisoned in the womb. And because of that, his brain was irretrievably broken. Through no fault of his own. Irish poet John O'Donoghue has written, "The beginning often holds the clue for everything that follows." And that couldn't be more true in Nicholas Cruz's life. September 24th, 1998, as Brenda Woodard was being transported to Plantation General Hospital, Linda Cruz was in Parkland, Florida, anxiously awaiting the phone call that her baby had been delivered. They already had the names picked out. Nicholas after her father, and Jacob after Roger's father. Nicholas was delivered C-section. Birth records indicate that he was slow to progress, and that the cord was wrapped around his neck 3 times. He was blue for the first minute of his life, and he had to be resuscitated. And as medical personnel manually pumped oxygen into his little lungs, his extremities remained blue for 5 minutes. And in that hospital room, after Nicholas was born, the evidence will show you, was Daniel Woodard, 11 years old now. And the evidence will show you that she held that baby and thought that he was the most beautiful thing in the world. And she knew that he would have all the opportunities that she never had. Linda Cruz's life was now perfect. She had the man she loved, that she called her husband, a beautiful baby boy, and a beautiful house in Parkland, Florida. And like most new mothers, she was excited, and there were parties, and people bought baby gifts, and people signed his baby book. And Linda introduced two people as her parents. You see, when Linda was 2 and her brother was 3 up in New York, they were left in a crib by their mother. And in that crib was a note from their mother. She was done mothering, and she left. So Linda and her brother were raised by their paternal grandparents. Wonderful people in their late 60s, as their father commuted from Long Island to the city as a chef. This abandonment that Linda felt and this insecurity would follow her for the rest of her life. But very few people in Florida knew about that life. Because remember, she had created her own reality. She also sent out birth announcements. And you hear from one of Linda's oldest friends. Her name is Mary Hamill. Mary Hamill. Remember that name. Because she is so important in Nicholas's life from the very beginning until very shortly before this tragedy. So Mary goes to her P.O. box. She gets her mail out. She gets in her car. She's driving down, opening the mail as she's driving. And then she sees a birth announcement, and she almost gets in a car accident. She immediately picks up her phone, and she calls Linda, and she says, "Why didn't you tell me you were pregnant?" And Linda says, "I wanted it to be a surprise." And it wasn't until years later, when Mary's daughter was actually babysitting for Zachary and Nicholas, that she happened to come across some paperwork, adoption paperwork. That's how Mary found out that the boys were adopted. Mary, one of Linda's very best friends. Linda was really good at creating her own reality. So what happens to Brenda? She does what she only knows how to do. She goes back in the streets, doing the exact same thing, because she's not tired enough yet. She's not done. And she's drinking, and she's drugging, and she's selling her body, and within 1 month, she's arrested again. And then she's released. But 9 months later, when Nicholas is 9 months old, she steals her mother's car, leads the police on a high-speed chase until she stopped, and when she's arrested for grand theft auto, driving while license suspended, and eluding law enforcement. And she was sentenced to 24 months Florida State Prison. And when she got to the reception center, she found out that she was 6 weeks pregnant. That baby is Zachary Cruz. A trick baby? We don't know. But we do know who Brenda called. She called that very same adoption attorney. And after Zachary was 6 months old in utero, he received the benefit that Nicholas never did. For the first time in a very long time, Brenda Woodard was clean and sober. And Zachary got the benefit of proper nutrition and prenatal care, all courtesy of the Florida Department of Corrections. And back in Parkland, Florida, Linda loved every minute of being a mother. She became friends with other mothers on the street. Although she was sometimes 20 or 25 years older than them, their children played together, and you're going to hear from one of those people. Trish Devaney. She had moved here from New Jersey. She was in her early 20s. Her and her boyfriend had just built a house down the street, and Trish had no one. Her family was far away, and Linda became like a mother to her. And they hung out all the time. But Linda never even told Trish that she wasn't married. Linda was actually Trish's maid of honor. And Trish's first baby, 7 months younger than Nicholas, would become Nicholas's first friend. And Linda liked having all the kids over. She had this beautiful house. She was proud of it. Swimming pool. The kids would play. And Nicholas grew. And he played with all of those other kids. And despite being smaller than everyone, everything was fine. Until it wasn't. His differences didn't really become apparent until he was around other children, where his behavior was different, where he didn't do what the other kids did. He didn't talk to the other kids. Couldn't communicate. He wasn't socializing. He wasn't developing like other children. Now, Trish will tell you that she tried to talk to Linda about this. And Trish will also tell you that because of those conversations, there were weeks where they didn't speak to each other. But Trish wasn't the only one that was telling Linda that Nicholas was different. Roger was too. And Linda could ignore Trish, but she couldn't ignore her own husband, and she didn't. And as life continued in Parkland, Florida, Linda got a phone call from that same adoption attorney. Nicholas's biological mother was pregnant again. Did she want the baby? Would Nicholas want to be a big brother? Of course, she said. Let's set up the adoption trust account. And on February 21st, 2000, Linda, one of her very best friends, Renee Brown, who you will also hear from, and Nicholas drove up to Lowell Correctional Institute, which is just right outside of Ocala, and picked up Zachary Cruz, Nicholas's new baby brother. So the family of 3 now became a family of 4. And as Zachary normally developed, it became more apparent that Nicholas was not developing at the same rate. No parent wants to admit that their child is different. And Linda was no different. And she was in denial for a really long time, until she couldn't be anymore. And when Nicholas was just turning 3, he went to his first psychiatrist, Dr. Melisa. And the records will show you that from that visit, Dr. Melisa said what a challenging child Nicholas was, that he ran into his office and got underneath his desk, and then 20 minutes later to pull him out. And Dr. Melisa wanted to help Linda, and he wanted to help Nicholas and Roger. You'll also see that there's some notations in the records about possible drug and alcohol exposure. He gave Linda literature. He gave her books. He gave her documentation. Give this to the teachers. Let's all work together. Let's figure this out. And please come back, Linda. The most important thing for Nicholas is consistency. Linda never went back. Having a developmentally delayed child was not part of Linda's perfect story. And at the same time Nicholas was having all of these developmental delays, social skills, communication, emotional, behavioral, gross and fine motor skills, adaptive function, sensory issues, you will hear from Ann Fisher. Ann Fisher was the director of Young Minds Learning Center, who noticed all of those developmental delays. and finally convinced Linda to get help. She will tell you that Nicholas's body wasn't proportioned. His head was too big for his body. His ears were too big for his head. He didn't play with the other children. He didn't talk to the other children. He was aggressive. She thought maybe he'd been exposed to drugs and alcohol in utero. And for months, Linda didn't want to hear it. Oh, he's young. He's going to grow out of it. All kids act like this. But Aunt Fisher was persistent. She wanted to help Linda Cruz. She wanted to help Nicholas Cruz. And she wanted to help Robert Cruz. She wanted to get them the help that they needed in order to parent a developmentally delayed child. And she wanted to get Nicholas the resources that he needed so that he could be as successful as he could be. So finally, Linda let go of some of her secrets. She tells Aunt Fisher Nicholas is adopted. We didn't know that before. And that his mother was a drug addict. And finally, Linda agreed to get help. And because of Aunt Fisher's referral, Nicholas was evaluated by the Florida Diagnostic and Learning Resource Center. It's also called Fiddlers. It's a government-funded program that helps all children with any type of issues. Usually early intervention. Let's catch them up. Let's get them early. And as a result of that evaluation, you will hear evidence that Nicholas was observed by teachers, by parents. Evaluations were done. And you will hear that as a result of the evaluation done by the Broward County School Board, Nicholas was classified with an eligibility of developmentally delayed in all areas and in a language impairment. The documentation shows that Nicholas acted more like a child that was just turning 2, and he was 3.5 years old. From that point on, 3 years old, Nicholas would be classified as an ESE student in the Broward County school system, what we used to call a special needs child. Knowing how important early intervention is and was, Nicholas went to a language-based preschool. He had an individual education plan. It's called an IEP, and you're going to hear all about that, where he had certain eligibilities, and he had certain services and goals and all this stuff, as well as behavioral interventions. And you will hear that Nicholas received a lot of services. A lot. Some of them actually worked. Nicholas would experience short periods of success, followed by unbelievably inappropriate behavior and academic struggles. But you see, all of those people that tried to help Nicholas, all of those teachers, all of those programs, didn't know what you now know. That Nicholas was poisoned mentally. He was brain damaged. Now, no one ever really figured out what was wrong with Nicholas until he's in his current situation. Some people speculated they were spot on. Fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, FASD, has often been referred to as an invisible disorder because it's often misdiagnosed. And what does it mean when somebody is misdiagnosed? Not just for Nicholas, but for anybody. It means you don't get the proper treatment. In some cases, you don't get the proper medicine. You don't get the proper interventions. You don't get the proper support. You don't get what you need to deal with your illness or your disorder. You will learn a great deal about Nicholas and about FASD, and the invisible will become visible to you. It will be frustrating and maddening to you about all the opportunities that were missed in Nicholas's life, things that he so desperately needed. Sadly, we can't undo those harms. And we can't undo the harms done to Nicholas. And we can't undo the harm that Nicholas did to others. FASD describes a range of effects that occur when an individual's brain is exposed to alcohol during pregnancy. Now, we're not talking about a mom having a glass of wine. We're talking about use and abuse. The effects of this disorder include physical, mental, developmental, academic, communication, every area. And it has lifetime implications. It's a disorder. It doesn't go away. Teachers and therapists, case managers, police, friends, and family will tell you how it impacted Nicholas's life. And we will present experts who specialize in FASD that will tell you what alcohol does to a developing brain. Listen to those experts, but more importantly, listen to the lay witnesses, because they will describe to you all of the behaviors that constitute fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I suspect that you're also going to hear another acronym. ASPD. Antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder is defined as a lifelong pattern of disregard for other people's safety, for their needs, and for the feelings of others. And there'll be doctors that'll come in and they have this book called the DSM-TR. And they'll say, check, check, check. He's got ASPD. But I'm going to be honest with you, our experts will come in here too and say, he probably checks off a lot of that. Nobody's going to say that he does not meet the criteria for ASPD. ASPD. Too many acronyms. But that's the easy thing. And this isn't supposed to be easy. And what you now have is the information that nobody else ever had. And you will hear that Nicholas's lifelong developmental delays, his communication and language disorders, his emotional and behavioral issues, his impaired motor skills, those are not explained by ASPD. Those are explained by FASD. But you see, you get to make those decisions individually. And you will hear that at Riverglades, which is that language-based preschool I just talked to you about, a special education center, he was receiving early interventions with the hopes that it would catch him up, but it didn't. Nicholas's disabilities were global. And when you don't know what causes something, it's really hard to figure out how to treat it, because you can't fix it, right? But we can treat disorders. You will also hear from one of Nicholas's special education teachers in preschool. She's going to describe to you a child that was terrified, filled with anxiety, stress. He didn't know how to communicate. He didn't understand when people were talking to him. And he was unsafe. And you'll hear her testify that she brought in a sheet. She put it over a table, something like this. And Nicholas had a safe spot. And he would go in there and he would do his work. And then you will hear later on she brought in a box. She cut windows out, put stuffed animals in there, and Nicholas would go in there where he felt safe because he couldn't really get along with the other kids. And you will hear that that teacher would go in there to teach him. You will hear that Nicholas did not communicate at all. He acted out and he acted like a tiger. You see, his behavior was his form of communication. He would bite, he would spit, he would kick, he would punch, he would pounce. Nicholas, use your little boy hands, was often heard in the classroom. And as he slipped further and further behind developmentally, his behavior got even more challenging. And another psychological evaluation was ordered. And you will hear testimony about that evaluation. That Nicholas had limited abilities. That he had a very low IQ. Now I'm going to be honest with you. The experts will tell you that when you get an IQ score from a very young child, it's a baseline. You use it cautiously. But what you will hear is that he was very impaired intellectually. And that would remain through his life. You will hear from that evaluation that Nicholas had a difficult time communicating and expressing himself, and that he often had misperceptions because he didn't understand what people were saying to him, which led to stress and anxiety and fear. The school psychologist described him as a youngster that was overly stressed and anxious. He was fine. What is most interesting about that school psychologist's evaluation is what she did next. This school psychologist had been involved in the Broward County school system for 38 years. And in those 38 years, she had made 2 recommendations for psychiatric evaluation on children as young as Nicholas. And that's what she did. She contacted Student Services for the Broward County School Board and made a recommendation that Nicholas get a psychiatric evaluation. We've got to find out what's going on with this kid. The school board never did that psychiatric evaluation. And on August 16th, 2014, 5 days before Nicholas was supposed to start kindergarten, he watched his father die in front of him. The family of 4 was now once again a family of 3. And Linda would become a single mother for the rest of her life to 2 very challenging young boys. And you see, throughout Roger and Linda's relationship, Roger controlled everything. Took care of the bills, took care of the house. So what Linda didn't know is that Roger had refinanced the house over and over again, and they were in deep financial trouble. You see, not only was Linda abandoned by the death of her husband, but she was betrayed by her husband. People will tell you that she never got over that. For kindergarten, Nicholas went to what is referred to as an ESE cluster, Special Education Cluster. And you're going to hear a lot of information about what is a cluster. You will hear that it's a small teacher-to-student ratio. There's a paraprofessional. There's usually more than one teacher, and there's a lot of support. There's a lot of intervention, and that's where Nicholas went. And you will hear from his family counselor, John Noonan, who was probably one of the only consistent things that Nicholas had throughout his childhood, from kindergarten until he left Coral Springs Elementary in 5th grade. And Mr. Noonan, he's going to testify about some of Nicholas's successes at Coral Springs Elementary. And he's going to tell you not about his failures, because he doesn't like that word, his struggles. In kindergarten, further testing once again determined that Nicholas was very developmentally delayed and that he required constant supervision. He wasn't able to retain information, and he struggled in all academic areas. And that year, he was retained. Nicholas was also diagnosed with ADHD, and he was placed on medication. He was 6 years old. And he would remain on medication on and off until 2016. You will hear that the best educational environment for Nicholas Cruz is one that is structured and supportive, with a small student-to-teacher ratio, with certified special education teachers, and behavioral intervention programs. At that time, he was seeing a psychiatrist, he was seeing a clinical psychologist, he had a case manager in home services. However, he continued to struggle with behavioral issues and academic issues. And that's because people still didn't know what was wrong with him. Throughout his time at Coral Springs Elementary, Nicholas struggled in all areas, academically, socially, developmentally, regardless of the services that he received. But despite all of those struggles, despite being below grade level almost every year, he was continually promoted. Because you see, if you're an ESE student, you can only be retained one time. And then you get what's called good cause promotions. Also during this time, throughout elementary school, Nicholas's medication was being changed frequently. They were trying to give him something for his aggression, something for his attention. So it was always on and off. And Linda, Mom, would stop the medication sometimes. It was too expensive. Put him back on it, take him off of it, and sometimes she would even divide the medication between Nicholas and Zachary. And as Nicholas's peers moved on, Nicholas continued to row his boat in circles. Despite these continual struggles in ESE, throughout Coral Springs Elementary, those services changed very little. Except, of course, when most of them were removed when he went to West Glades Middle School. He was 13 years old, moving into 6th grade. He was leaving a school with 650 students and moving to a school with 1,500. And back at home, there was no structure. The train was off the track. Not only were the police now responding to the house, but so was the S team. And the S team is the Youth Emergency Services. They're through Henderson Behavioral Health. It's a mobile crisis unit. You can pick up the phone and say you need help, and they come out. You see, Linda's perfect world, her facade was crumbling. On the outside, everything looked really good. This beautiful house. But inside, she was overwhelmed, she was exhausted, and she had no support system. And Linda fell deeper and deeper into a depression. And her overwhelming anxiety about money led to locks on the fridge, timers on showers, and her unplugging all of the appliances at night. And Linda started using local law enforcement and the S team as co-parents to help her control her 2 boys. And that glass of wine that she had every night would turn into 2 glasses of wine, 3 glasses of wine. West Glades Middle School. When kids go to middle school, they are thrown to the wolves. It's a completely different environment. And the services that a special needs kid gets in elementary school, Jack Vasey will tell you, principal of West Glades Middle at the time, we just don't have the staff. We just don't have the services. We don't have the structure and the support that these kids need. So what everybody knew Nicholas needed, which was structure and support, it was gone. And he roamed the halls of West Glades Middle. And at the beginning of middle school, Nicholas, he did all right. But when the social, we're in 6th grade now, emotional and academics demands continued to pile on Nicholas, his behavior worsened. And even though he still received some ESC services, it was in a mainstream classroom now, sometimes with 30 children, and teachers that did not have the specialized training that they needed, that they deserved to have to deal with a student like Nicholas. You will hear that they tried. They went to administration. They went to the ESC staff. They wrote referrals. You see, Nicholas would yell in class. He would uncontrollably laugh for attention. He would destroy property. He even grabbed a phone from a teacher's hand as she was trying to call 911. And his fascination with firearms began. He brought a weapon to school, which resulted in him not being allowed to have a backpack anymore. And he was placed on an escort-only status. That means that there was some adult or a school monitor that literally had to walk Nicholas from class to class every day. And without proper interventions, Nicholas's behavior got worse. Not only was Nicholas not getting an appropriate education, but no other student that was in class with him was getting an appropriate education either because of his disruptive behavior. And teachers will tell you that they went to administration, they went to ESC, that they were blown off. They were told to deal with it, that Nicholas deserved an education. No one here is going to tell you that Nicholas Cruz or any other special needs child doesn't deserve an education. But what a special needs child deserves is the appropriate environment where their individual needs are met. That placement was not West Glades Middle School for Nicholas. Instead of putting Nicholas in a school where he could maybe be productive, he remained at West Glades Middle School until the second half of 8th grade, when finally he was transferred to Cross Creek. Cross Creek is a specialized educational center that educates children whose behavior is a manifestation of their mental illness. When Nicholas left West Glades Middle School, he was struggling in every academic area. And he had received 70 disciplinary referrals. And at home, Nicholas was receiving case management. There was an in-home therapist from Henderson and from Camelot Community Care. And they had very strong suspicions that Nicholas needed more services. He needed more help. They needed a proper diagnosis. And they made lots of recommendations. Very few of them Linda listened to. And you will also hear it was during this time the psychiatrist that was prescribing Nicholas medication had recommended that Nicholas be placed in a residential treatment facility. But you see, if that happened, then Linda would lose his Social Security benefits. He never went to that treatment facility. But on February 7, 2014, Nicholas was enrolled in Cross Creek School. Cross Creek is the most restrictive educational environment in Broward County. This school serves students that have emotional, behavioral disabilities through a therapeutic and a behavioral environment. This is not a behavioral center. This is not a punitive school. There are those schools in Broward County, and this is not one of them. Let me explain to you what Cross Creek is like. They have 13 clinical therapists. They have a school psychiatrist on staff that does medication management and provides services to all students. 2 psychiatric nurses, 2 behavioral specialists that develop behavioral plans, implement therapeutic resources. They have a school resource officer, they have a security specialist, they have 15 crisis management staff members that are trained in verbal de-escalation skills as well as professional crisis management. 27 educational support providers, all of them, everyone at that school is ESE certified. 19 certified teachers. There's a speech and language pathologist. There's a school-wide behavioral system, a school-wide behavioral plan. At that school, there's approximately 80 staff members. It goes from kindergarten to 12th grade. There's 150 students, and they are constantly supervised. And remember, the evidence will show you that what we know about Nicholas's educational environment is that when it's structured and when it's supportive, he does better. And you know how Nicholas did? He did pretty well. Behaviorally, academically, was everything perfect? No. But remember, he's mentally ill and he's brain damaged. But he did well for himself. But his fascination with firearms continued. His mother was told by many people from the school and from the in-home case management, do not buy him a BB gun. Do not buy him an airsoft rifle. Linda Cruz bought him a BB gun. Linda Cruz bought him an airsoft rifle. And you will hear that Cross Creek psychiatrist, along with Linda, developed a home safety plan because Nicholas was having dreams about being covered in blood. And you know what you will also hear from that Cross Creek psychiatrist? As they're trying to partially mainstream Nicholas to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. Junior ROTC is not recommended for this child. Nicholas was partially mainstreamed to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. 2 classes they enrolled him in. One of them was junior ROTC. And Cross Creek, like they do for most of their students, hold a carrot. We want children to be in the least restrictive environment. You'll hear a lot about that. Get them moving to their home-based school. And most kids really want to do that. So that's what they did. They held a carrot in front of Nicholas. Good behavior, you go to MSD. But the reason why Nicholas's behavior improved, why he was having some success academically, is because he was exactly where he should have been, at Cross Creek. And you will hear a lot about that transition from Cross Creek to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School. You will hear that eventually he was full-time mainstream. And people will tell you that that never should have happened. And you will hear evidence from one of his support facilitators, a member of the special education team, ESE, that she received Nicholas's IEP, individual education plan. You're going to hear a whole bunch about this, which lists his eligibility, which lists impairments and domain, and gives a history of the child's behavior in other schools. You'll hear from that support facilitator that she took that IEP and that she went to the assistant principal that was in charge of the ESE program at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, and she said, look at this. This child does not belong here. And she was told to stay in her lane. So Nicholas went from a school with 150 students, all those resources I just explained to you, constant supervision, the most restrictive educational environment in Broward County, to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, with a population of 3,333 students. And at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School, Nicholas struggled. Behaviorally, socially, and academically. He started cutting himself. He even drank gasoline. And he talked incessantly about how he wanted to buy a firearm when he turned 18. It was so concerning that a behavioral threat assessment was done because the school social worker and the school therapist were terrified. They were concerned about Nicholas, and they were concerned about the other students. So they went to the school resource officer, Scott Peterson, who knew Nicholas, because you see, everybody knew Nicholas. And they said, he's cutting, he's drank gasoline, he wants to buy a firearm, he needs to be Baker Acted. And what a Baker Act is when you are a danger to yourself, potentially, or someone else. And you need to go to a facility where you can be assessed, maybe medication management, maybe referrals to other programs. And Scott Peterson said, I'm not Baker Acting that kid. Go ahead and call Henderson. So that school social worker and that school therapist called Henderson, and out came that bus, the Youth Emergency Service Mobile Crisis Unit. And they talked to Nicholas, and Nicholas said, I'm fine. I'm fine. So they didn't Baker Act him. But that did not stop the school social worker, did not stop the school therapist. They called Henderson again, and then they called the abuse hotline through the Department of Children and Family, which sparked an investigation where Nicholas was classified as a vulnerable adult due to mental illness. And DCF went out there and they said everything's fine. And Henderson and their mobile crisis unit went back out there 3 times. And Nicholas was assessed for a potential Baker Act. And of those 3 times, he was assessed by 2 mental health interns, which means legally they can't even Baker Act anybody. He wasn't Baker Acted. And 6 days later, on October 1st, 2016, Nicholas Cruz and Linda Cruz walked into Gun World of South Florida, where Nicholas bought his first real gun. All right. As a result of that threat assessment, Nicholas was no longer allowed to carry a backpack to school. And every morning he had to be searched. And it was around that time that MSD, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, realized this kid does not belong here. He needs to go back to Cross Creek. That's where he might be successful. So they pulled Nicholas to the office, now 18, now able to make his own educational decisions. And they gave Nicholas a choice. You can go back to Cross Creek, or you can stay here at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and revoke all of your services, all of your special education services. On a document that was generated by we don't know who, typed up, not a formal Department of Education revocation form, Nicholas signed his name. And he revoked all of his special education services. Think about that. This is a child who had been receiving special education services since he was 3 years old. And they were all gone now. So Nicholas remained at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas until February of 2017, when he had a meeting and they told him, "You're never going to graduate. You don't have enough credits. You need to leave." So Nicholas left. He literally ran off of school campus. And when he did it, one of those school monitors, as he was watching Nicholas run off the campus, said, that kid is going to come back and shoot this school up. So now you have a child who has no ESE services, no support. He didn't stop being brain damaged. He didn't stop being emotionally handicapped. He didn't stop having a language impairment. He didn't stop needing services, but they were all gone. And you're going to hear a lot from those teachers that tried to do something. They'll come here and they'll testify, and some of them do not want to be here. They're here because they're under subpoena. But we had to bring them in so that you get all of the information that you need. Because you have to make a decision about whether or not another human being lives or dies. And what they tell you and the things that they say are not excuses, they're not justifications, and they're not defenses. They're part of Nicholas's story. And it's my job to tell you that story. So after Nicholas left MSD, he floundered around, went to some off-campus learning centers where he'd work on a computer, self-paced kind of thing. No structure, no stability, no medication. And then on November 1st, 2017, the one consistent person in his life, the one that loved him unconditionally, the woman that did the very best that she was able to do, Linda Cruz, she died. And Nicholas was there. Nicholas was 19. He had just turned 19 in September. And Zachary Cruz was 17. And by the time of the shooting, law enforcement had gone to the Cruz's house over 40 times. And by the time of the shooting, the YES team had gone to the Cruz family house over 14 times. We will tell you Nicholas's life story so that we can give you reasons to vote for life. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to ask each and every one of you to do that. And now the state has the responsibility of proving all of the aggravation, the reasons for death. And you must all agree on that. And we will present you with mitigation. Reasons for life. And you don't have to agree on that. In fact, the law says that you can disagree. You can give mitigation any weight that you want. And it's individual because different things hold different value to other people. None of us has walked the same walk. Your vote has to be an individualized moral decision, not collective. And you never have to justify, explain, or defend your vote for life. You can deliberate, and everybody here will encourage you to do that. But you don't debate it. And I know that each of you will be respectful to your fellow jurors and respect their vote, even if you don't agree with it. You are never required to vote for death. Even if the state of Florida proves every single aggravator, you can still vote for life. And there's something else I have to remind you of. You are confined to the statutory aggravators that the state proves to be beyond a reasonable doubt. And that does not include those victim impact statements. They were heartbreaking. They were beautiful to hear those people talk about what they had lost in their beautiful children. But you're not allowed to consider it in the verdict. The law requires you to put it aside. And you are here because each of you said that you could do that. It's hard, but you said you could. And we know that you will. We all agree, everyone here agrees that Nicholas deserves to be punished. Without a doubt. But life without the possibility of parole is a severe enough penalty, is a severe enough punishment. When you not only look at the crime, but you look at the person that committed it. I'm confident that once you hear Nicholas's story, that you will know in your heart that a vote for life is the right vote, and that justice will be served with that verdict. Your life verdict can come from all of the things that Nicholas did not show those 17 beautiful souls. It can come from compassion. It can come from grace. And it can come from mercy. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a brief 10-minute recess, just long enough for everyone to stretch and just take 10 minutes. Please do not discuss the case. Please leave your notepads behind, and we'll be back with you very shortly.